Salutations. So, I just finished recording my video for my top five, or no, sorry, not my top five, but a timeline of my favorite films of all time. And I decided that, I purposefully made that video a bit short. So I just kind of figured, let's just keep going, record something else. So I figure I'd talk about my favorite types of films of all time. I say types because I don't know, some of this stuff wouldn't be considered genres or plot structures or settings. It's sort of a mishmash of all that. So let's just roll with it. I didn't prepare. I didn't write any notes anywhere or anything. Let's just go for it. So, also, if you're new here, basically what I do is I just turn on my laptop, and ramble at it, with no cuts or anything to make me sound more competent than I am. So, let's get into it. About a minute and a half in, I was trying to make that short. So, one of my favorite types of films is sort of like a rise to power story, kind of like a rise and fall of an empire. Usually it's like a business, something like Wolf of Wall Street, for example, how he sort of rises to the top of the stock market game, or There Will Be Blood is another one. Death Note. That's not a business, but it's someone trying to literally become a god, so it qualifies in that pursuit of power story. That's a better way to describe it. The pursuit of power is, I don't know why I make that hand gesture when I do it. I'm picturing one of those line charts where it's starting off small and getting bigger and whatnot. That explains that gesture. Anyways, if I haven't previously stated, it is 1:36 a.m. and I'm just here to vibe on films, and if I make sense when I do it, bonus points. So, rise to power, I love it. I love that struggle of how normally, the way I really like it to go down in most of these is where you kind of start to, you like your protagonist because their life is hard and they're struggling and whatnot, so you start to really kind of like them as they start to kind of rise through the ranks, and then eventually they start to go too far and turn things around for the worse, and you start to not really vibe with them anymore until you're eventually realizing that you've been following the villain of the story for a while, and you've learned to sympathize with him and empathize with him, which is my favorite vibe possibly for a film to give off is a sense of being really empathetic for people regardless of circumstances. Another perfect example of something like this is Breaking Bad, because it's all about Walter White rising to power in the meth world. There are also really good examples where you don't necessarily feel like they've lost, they've learned from their experiences, but they didn't necessarily fall from power. Sometimes they succeed and they stay at this high status. We're supposed to learn from that. Some of the examples that I mentioned, it goes one way where basically they win and they've just achieved this higher status. And some of them, they fly a little too close to the sun and their wings melt and they die. Um, so that's one of my favorite types of films, I guess. I don't know. See, like, would you call that a genre? But not really, because I mean, like, Death Note and There Will Be Blood are kind of different genres. Um, but like, they're the same basic story. So I don't know if you'd call that just story type or whatever. Anyway, moving on. Um, this one is a bit different because it's not defined by like the way the story progresses, and it's not about the types of characters in it. It's just like about the setting and the vibe and subtext that you can pull off of the setting, and that is space. Like, I have, like, I'm pretty sure this is a compilation of Hubble telescope images. Like, space is my fucking jam. Like, it's aesthetically the most beautiful thing I can look at. It is fucking incredible. It makes me kind of wish that I, excelled in science class in school, but also kind of not, because my uneducated ass looks into space and sees all the stars and shit. I'm like, oh wow, that's really pretty. And I don't need to know anything more. So I guess examples for space films. There's quite a few. It can be like space is the main focus, or it can be space as the setting. Like, if I'm thinking of space as the main focus of the film, obviously there are some examples like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is rapidly becoming it's climbing the ranks of my favorite films of all time list. Also, Interstellar, that's right up there. Like, definitely not as much as 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I liked it for sure. What other good space exploration films have I seen? I don't know. Like, it doesn't have to be like those would be space as the main focus. And by the way, speaking of space, I recommended this in my other video that I filmed this morning, but tonight, this morning, whatever. If any of you fuck with lo-fi, or if you haven't started to fuck with lo-fi yet, I highly recommend this compilation called Space Traveling. Thumbnail looks like that. Quite possibly my favorite lo-fi compilation, but I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. But anyway, side note there. But then you have films where space is just kind of the setting, and it's not like thematically what it's about. It's not necessarily used as a metaphor as much, which is what I'm all about. I'm all about that abstract space shit, like 2001: The Space Odyssey. But also, I'm all about, Star Wars. And fucking, like, specifically Return of the Jedi. But I'm all about Star Wars. Because, even when they're not in space, there's still a little bit of a space vibe sometimes. And I fucking love Star Wars. Or, like, Cowboy Bebop. That's a good one. That's a good example. Let's see. Aliens, plural. I mean, I like Alien, but I like Aliens a lot more. solid example. I don't know why I'm looking for more examples. I'm deliberately trying to make this video and the prior video that I filmed tonight shorter, because they've tended to be about like 30 to 54 minutes. I think my longest one was like 54 minutes and however long. So I'm trying to make these shorter. So we've got rise to power, or at least struggling to hopefully attempt to rise to power. We've got space. So let's talk about probably my favorite type of film. And that would be, I guess you'd call them like confined environment, almost kind of stage play type films, like films where all your characters are in basically one defined area, and it's all about how they interact with each other. Like, there's no grand adventure or like big bad guy to defeat or any real source of conflict other than the differences of the people. Like, my favorite example of this, because currently it's my favorite film of all time, which I just filmed a video talking about how my favorite of all time has changed several times. But anyway, The Breakfast Club is the best example of this that I can do. Because, you know, the whole point is that for the vast majority of the movie, they're all in the library, and like they're each kind of the protagonist and antagonist. Like they're each the protagonist of their own little story, while being like a source of conflict for other people. And I fucking love it. I am all about that shit. Other examples besides The Breakfast Club would be like The Hateful Eight. That's probably my second favorite example of this. I have yet to see 12 Angry Men, but from what I'm told, it's basically that. What else do we have? Well, I mean, I guess that's enough examples to kind of give you the point. I should note that it doesn't necessarily have to be a room, you know what I mean? Like, The Breakfast Club is a good example because, you know, they're literally just in, like, this one room for the most part. Hateful Eight, similar deal. But, like, you can have the concept and, like, the vibe of something like The Breakfast Club, and saw some thumbnails in the back of that. Alright, let's just... I have no idea what's about to play right now. Oh, it's pretty. We'll go with that. Anyway. Can't even really see it once I move in front of the camera, but the point of what I was getting at was you don't really have to have the strict, like, walled off environment for this vibe to work. And I know this is going to sound like a reach for what I'm talking about, like, take Game of Thrones, for example. It has a similar kind of vibe where, at least, you know, in the earlier bits, it's like, even if there is kind of a protagonist, there's also kind of not. Like, there's definitely no clear good guys and bad guys. That's a crucial vibe for what I'm talking about. You know, like, everyone's sort of more or less, like, on equal footing in terms of, like importance, and, like, there's no... How should I describe this? Like, if you think of, like, the houses as people and Westeros as like the defined area that they're in. It's basically that same vibe, just on a bigger scale that I get from Breakfast Club or Hateful Eight, where it's like people will just being people. They're doing things. They're trying to like achieve what they want to achieve and whatnot, and what one person does influences another person, which influences another person, and it's just like a tangled web of characters in which no one. That I guess that'd be the best way to describe it. Like instead of like this line where like one character goes on like this epic journey to a goal and whatnot, it's just like a bunch of people and all their lines are like crossing into this one web. I can hear what that sounds like, and it sounds like some stoner ramblings, which definitely not the case. Yeah. Anyway, point is, like characters that sort of have to interact with each other because they're just forced together, be it through like an outside force or just their own goals and whatnot. Like typically, it is kind of cool if there's like an outside force influencing them, like the principal on the Breakfast Club, or like the White Walkers in Game of Thrones or something. That's kind of a cool addition. Or like you have a bunch of people all interacting with each other, and then you have this other thing just outside of it. I don't know. I like that, but it's not crucial. So that's that. I know this is gonna make like no sense unless you live in my brain. But you know what? I'm going with it. I'm just here to vibe on films, and that's just about it. So I feel like I might film one more after this because it's 1:51 a.m. and I don't work tomorrow. So be on the lookout for my favorite anime list coming up. Auf Wiedersehen, I guess.